Well, welcome everybody. And again, we're going to do this at noon. I also just wanted to mention that this video will be on YouTube. And if anybody you know overseas or someone wants to watch it, it'll also be played Wednesday night. And there'll be a Zoom group discussion after it for anybody like in the Philippines who can't attend here at noon because of time differences and so forth. There are these handouts, and we'll also have them available online. And as you see, I've given you way too much information. Does that surprise anybody? But just in the kind of the first one in your syllabus, the SMM, I just really encourage you to get a notebook and be able to have these handily as we go through the future classes, because you'll refer back to them a lot of times. But in this course...
Hey, Bill, why don't you just, if you don't mind, just mention a little bit that this class, for everybody that may be here that doesn't know, that this could be a Bible school class.
This is a Bible school class or just a lunch class, either way. So, but if anyone wants for credit and so forth, I guess if you're just auditing, you have the option to do the homework. If you are on the class, I guess you're giving up that option. I love this verse in 1 Peter 5:1 that just sets the theme of pastoring people to change lives. So I, Peter, exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. Shepherd the flock that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly. Somebody say eagerly. Not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. So better than a certificate, if you take this class seriously, you're going to get a crown of glory. And again, what I wanted to focus on, you see kind of in the course description, I believe that anyone who's a Christian is called to shepherd. If you had children, you're a shepherd. If you're trying to care for a group at your business, you're a shepherd. It's another name for leader. And I'm very much going to approach this class as a leadership class using the tools of pastoring. So whether you're, again, a business person, a parent, or especially if you're a life group leader, if you heard any of my vision, you know the big vision, we call it a mission hub in every nation and a light in every neighborhood. We need hundreds and hundreds of, we call them care pastors or just frontline shepherds. The truth is, a church already as large as ours, it's impossible for our staff to pastor all the people. And so we're putting that calling out. And it would be a joy to me to see at least 100 lay pastors raised up this year. You would feel totally comfort doing what Sephora did, visiting someone at the jail, going to the hospital, or sitting with a family who just lost a loved one. Being a part of a prayer ministry like Steve described. I mentioned last night, and I'll repeat it, that we're going to, by faith, do a 5-week, we're calling it Possessing the Land, healing prayer, 9 a.m. on Saturdays in the youth. But part of that is to pray over this campaign. But the second part of it is to really establish a healing prayer ministry that people could come by on a Saturday and have more time than they have at the altar and sit down with a few people. And so I would love for some of you to consider being willing to be a prayer counselor, because you'll learn a whole lot just in that interaction time, praying with people and so forth. So those are some of the reasons why we're doing it. And I want to really highlight this shepherd. This is my passion. I do believe two things. One, as it goes with shepherds, it goes with the flock. You don't develop a healthy flock. You develop healthy shepherds who will reproduce healthy sheep. And I think that if you notice that verse very much, there's a real emphasis on healthy. There's kind of three main focuses of books that I'm recommending for the class. One is this one called Help, I'm a Pastor. And he's hiding in the... anyhow, I have a cute meme I'll send some of you, which was this guy who looks like about 90, and he says, yes, I don't have any stress, and it's signed Pastor Green, 22 years old. But anyhow, there is a possibility that pastoring can add age to your life. But the point is, it's hard, it's rough. And so the other book goes with this, Emotionally Healthy Leadership by Pete Scazzaro. How to do something where it doesn't ruin your family and stay in the ministry. So that's one angle of this. The other angle of this, really has a lot to do with just the core practices and skills of effective pastoring. And one of the things you'll see is your first assignment. It's called the Pastoring to Change the World Assignment 1. And I would love two things. Just one would just be giving me more input on why you're taking this class. What do you feel like God wants to develop in you? I gave you a list of some of the topics we could be doing, but you might have others, and you could just tell me, I really want to learn more about conflict resolution skills, helping people in grief, having difficult conversations to correct people in the church, helping people make good decisions. I feel led to start a small group, or I'd like to start a new ministry, just because I want to talk to you in terms of what actually we could be equipping you to do. And so I would get feedback that way. This other thing, and I really won't have time to address it this week, but we'll talk about it next week. From this book, Help, I'm a Pastor, I'm giving you 71 core values, because I believe that leadership starts with identity. It starts with, here's who I am, here's how I'm going to treat people, here is my response to that crazy situation, and knowing it in advance. And I love in the book, you'll say, what do I do when, as a pastor, when someone gets up and prophesies about the election and calls one of the candidates the Antichrist? All right, that's a pastor situation, or someone comes and says, I was just called to marry the youth leader, or whatever it is. There's a lot of messy things about being a pastor. Or when two people on the worship team aren't talking to each other anymore. He actually gives you about 100 scenarios like that. But then the question is, what is your core value? We call it a culture of honor. So this gives you 71 pastoral values that Steve Backlund has. I thought that's a pretty good place to start. But one of the goals of this class is for you to have a lot of set values. For example, when someone calls screaming and angry, we get this pretty weekly with our kids ministry. Somebody punched my son in the face, and on and on and on. Here's how I will respond. When I get a homeless person come in here, and how do I treat them and balance love and truth, all of those things. But begin to think of scenarios, because one of the things I'd love to do in this class is to do a lot of scenario discussion. Yay, Melanie, join us. Hey, there's lunch if you want it. But a scenario situation, because I found that was most helpful in my mentoring, is to think of 100 scenarios and how would you respond? And then I'd love for you to ask me questions. And that would be my heart. If you know, my greatest passion right now, and even started Dale Walker Ministries, is something that's simply to mentor pastors, because I believe that the vision to reach the world is multiplying pastors. One of the other things, the urgency, is notice I don't have that verse here, but in Luke chapter 9:38, the famous verse, Jesus looks at the masses, and it says what he feels compassion, because they are like sheep without a shepherd. And then he says, pray to the Lord of the harvest that he will send workers. The implication is that he will send shepherds. And I'm convinced it's so interesting that Jesus says, when you pray for the lost, when you pray for the harvest, he didn't say pray for the lost, although in other places we're obviously told to do that. He said, pray for the people that will shepherd the lost. And here's what I found. Do you know how I found reaching the world is going to happen? It's not going to by starting with the sheep. It's going to by starting with the shepherds. What I believe is the key to growth of a ministry, to reaching a city for Christ, is new pastors engaging with broken people. New shepherds being raised up who skillfully love people. And I promise you, if we have enough pastors engaging with people, we will have more people than we can know what to do with. Because the kingdom of God is built one person at a time. Just loving that person to life. And if you have the skills to do that, you'll always have it. So if we can have 100 pastors, I just know that we'll have 10,000 people we're ministering to before long, because it's just the automatic. So I really want you to think in terms of your engagement. How can I engage with the pastor? I want you to come to church from now on, not as a sheep, but as a shepherd. I'm coming here. I'm thinking the way Dale would think when he walks into this building. I'm thinking of that person. I'm trying to consider how I could engage each one. And I've got my sidekick here, Thomas, and I'm always going to be asking him for his comments on those things.
You know, Dale, I think one of the things that I'm thinking about just as you're talking is that there is my difficulty is trying to strike the balance between getting the job done, whatever that is, and shepherding and people. And I've told you, 80% of my day probably is as a result of interruptions, which I enjoy, which I invite, which I actually say, this is the important part of why I'm here. But I'm hoping that there will be a time when you also can speak to the idea of how do you do both when there's both that needs to happen. I got to get the job done. Yeah. I've also got to shepherd people.
Great question. That's probably the central. And we err on the side of mercy. What does that mean? We're the guy who stops for the guy on the side of the road, even if it means we're late for 20 other assignments. If I have to drop a class because I was helping people, I will do that. That's just a pastor. You'll just know your heart. As I've told the story where I was so engaged in figuring out a number of problems for the church, and someone wanted to introduce me to new people outside of my office, and I was hiding. I was saying, why does my office have to have that window? Anyhow, because people know when I'm here. And I said, but Lord, I'm working on the ministry. And he just said, they are the ministry. And Jesus was interrupted continuously. But yes, you still got to get things done. The bills have to get paid and so forth. So we'll talk a lot about that. But this is gold, these core values. And we want to talk a lot about that. Because, like I say, more important than technique is if you know how to change the culture, and if you know how your values are set and how your leadership responses are going to be made, rather than reacting to the negative, you're proacting based on a commitment Jesus showed you of what he would do in that situation. That's what makes you an effective person. I wanted to just do a teaching today because it was going to be my podcast leadership. And it leads into this. We'll go more into pastoring next week. But it's the next phase on loving and leading in a divisive, toxic culture. And I thought this was huge. If I could say one thing that I think is the key, that is so key to pastoring, is setting culture, a culture of honor, of hospitality. All of a sudden, a lot of the pastoring will take care of itself. I don't know, someone can look up this quote, because all of a sudden it's a Peter Drucker quote that I can't remember the exact, but where it says, culture beats something like that, programs for lunch every time. I don't know what it is, but The point is, if you really want to affect and parent good, don't focus just on the next thing your kid is going to do. Focus on the culture of your home. If you get the environment right, people will naturally start doing the right thing. And so that's a huge part of it. The challenge in our time, and I'm going to reflect on this, and Steve, I'm sorry you're going to hear something for a second time. I'm sorry, because you were at a El Paso meeting with me. But I just felt I wanted to catch them up with this. You all agree right now, politically in every way, we're in a toxic culture. And if you heard the debates and everything else, it's who can win the race to the bottom here as fast as we can. But really, that affects the church. And I have found that the church, ever since COVID, there's more people coming. I described it as coming to a convention of porcupines with everyone having their quills fully extended. People are more touchy, are more demanding, and are more hurt by the culture and the conversation. And the big question I was asking is, how do you balance a stand for biblical convictions while modeling the grace of Jesus in a culture where you're grieved over the iniquities, but you've got to reach the people who are lost? And there's a powerful book. We just did High Road Leadership, and there's a sequel to it that I'm going to encourage you to get. That's the 4th book, and I don't know if I put it in there, but it's called Jesus, the High Road Leader, by Chris Hodges and John Maxwell. And it's taken the same concept of high road, and it's showing how Jesus lived it out in every relational encounter. And I just wanted to mention this because I find that even in the church, I said it's been affected. I've had several people come to me and say, I can't go to that church anymore. Why? One church, again, this is people telling me, said, you can't come here if you're not a Republican. I mean, that was what they were told. They left that church. I've had people tell me all kinds of things in this culture. I said, someone mentioned this, that 1 out of 6 Americans have families that aren't talking to each other because of political views. And it's such a divisive time. And I think that this gift and this thing of setting a culture of grace in a world of hostility is one of the greatest challenges of a pastor. Amen? Yeah.
What's your opinion concerning Rick Warren and his he being excommunicated?
Well, I don't, I think that's a individual one. I think I'll cover that. I don't know exactly that specific thing of that specific issue. But what I do feel like is the bigger question is, how do we really live with disagreement and tension without going into division? And that's what I'll focus on. Whether it's how we speak about people in the other church. I love this quote on the 2nd page. Chris Hodges said, people who are effective for Jesus, their life was so attractive that people who knew them but didn't know God wanted to know God because they knew them. And I think that's our biggest goal as Christians, not even just pastors, but we're going to have to connect with people before we correct people. And if we ever get on the side of, and I'll just say about politics, what I believe is, man, we got to vote. I just believe we need to focus on the policy issues, not the people. We don't need to make it about candidates. And I was at a Christian gathering all of a sudden. I couldn't believe how south it went when people started talking politics. And I said, you would never post that about your brother in Christ. You would never rail like that, in a life group. Why are you doing that about a politician? It was like, where did you get this potty mouth all of a sudden? Because you're so mad at this and that. And I said, that's going to undermine the gospel. So we need a very wise and gracious approach to that. And I feel like Jesus, of all people, was the greatest example of how do you maintain convictions but create connections. Don't you love how he went to Zacchaeus' house, the biggest sinner in town. And the guy who was probably like, think of the head mafia guy in Las Cruces. And he says, I'm coming to your house for lunch today. What was he saying? I'm going to connect with him before I try to correct him. And because he did that, the man changed. I think of the Apostle Paul when he was in Athens, and here's all these idol worshipers. Don't you love it? He doesn't get up there and says, you dirty dogs, why are you talking to idols? He gets up there and he says, I perceive you're very religious. He says, you have a sincere hunger for God. Isn't that powerful? He could have focused on the negative, but he says, I'm going to build a bridge, not a wall. I'm going to find a way to connect with people. The words that God has given us as our role is ambassadors or reconcilers. It doesn't say we're called to be prosecuting attorneys. We're called to be the representative of Jesus that brings peace. And I love the verse in 2 Corinthians 5. It says, you are ambassadors of God, as though God himself were entreating through you to others, be reconciled to God. Everywhere you go, your first task is to carry the heart of God that says, please be reconciled to God. Please be reconciled to Jesus. Please don't leave this world without Jesus. So it's that passion in that heart. And what does that mean? One, I'll just say, creating a right culture is all about your words. And James 1 says, be slow to speak, quick to listen, and slow to anger. How many know a lot of people get that in the verse order? I am quick to anger, and man, am I fast to speak. And if I get around to it, I'll listen a little bit every once in a while. Yes, go ahead, Regina.
I love that you listed Paul and Daniel, how they served even though they were with those who didn't believe and who were actually sometimes doing terrible things, like Daniel served Nebuchadnezzar, who was not a wonderful person.
Threw people into fires.
Right. But something that we learned in California, because we were around a lot of people who were unbelievers, we started brand new, is that, so for example, our grandson, he is a know-it-all, and he wants to tell you all his knowledge and tell you everything. He even corrected Mel when he was driving our RV. So the thing, it's like, really? And he's 12. It's the last time you drove an RV. But the thing is that God helps us to look to what is that? Why is he a know-it-all? Why does he have to try and tell me things? And the Lord revealed he's a teacher.
Wow, good.
Teacher. And so sometimes people who are so angry at injustice, but maybe what they think is injustice is not necessarily truly injustice, but they have mercy. They have compassion. So when we look at non-believers and you see a passion about something, look to the heart and see what is that thing that God gave them in their personality to help the world that may have turned to the wrong way.
That's so good.
So that helps me because we deal with a lot of non-Christian and we want to minister to them and not just hate them because, oh my gosh, you do this, but look to why do they do it and know that God gave them a gift and they just have to take it to the right place.
Man, that is so powerful. So much that. And that's, I think, what Jesus did with Zacchaeus. He saw something. Everyone else, he said, this guy will win the city. And he did. Of course, the woman caught in adultery, he speaks truth, but first he connects in compassion. Where are your accusers? And then he says, I forgive you, but go and sin no more. So it's not either or, it's speaking truth. I just, in terms of evangelism, and I love this, one of the things Chris Hodges, as a youth pastor, used to do, and I thought this was excellent. In those days, you could go to lunch, and I used to go as a youth pastor to have lunch with the students at high schools. I don't know if they allow you to do that anymore. But we'd sit there, and all he would do is ask questions. Because how many know one of the things, and I have the statistics somewhere, I forget what it is, but Jesus asked hundreds and hundreds of questions, and he only gave like 20 answers to questions. Well, what all that says is Jesus was more about listening to people than he was about telling people. He was always trying to create a conversation because that will open the heart. You're never going to break down a wall by yelling at people, but by hearing their side of the story, especially when you totally disagree with them. Someone said we need to quit yelling at the other side. Unfortunately, with our social media and everything, we're just on the algorithms to hear and read people who say what we think and believe. But the very people we're called to reach don't believe that. And every time we post, think, boy, we're getting through to them. They are not listening. We're just reinforcing the prejudices of people like us. But anyhow, the breaking the wall is to get close. And so, for example, what he would do, he would say, you don't believe in God and you don't go to church. Please tell me why. I just want to hear it. And then and he would hear that and he would say, something his response would be like this. You know what? If I believed in the God you're describing, I wouldn't believe in him either. And if that was church, I would never go there. And then he would say, you know what? I do. I also know some really mean Christians. But do you want to know what the Bible says? Are you curious about the other side? And what is he doing? He's not cramming it down his throat. He says, I listened first because I heard. I've shared with the atheist that I got to lead to the Lord in school way back when, and he shamed me in front of the whole class. He told me, everybody, I won't use all the words. And I got counsel. Well, what do I do with him? You know, I could have argued. And my dad just told me, go make him your friend. That's how you defeat an enemy. And so I just said, hey, I'm really curious in your opinions. Can you tell me what you really think? Some of that was really, he was really excited. And so we walked home from school, and day after day, he told me why he hated Christians, why he hated God. God showed me hurts that he had. And then one day, he got injured in a basketball game, and I asked if I could pray for him. I prayed for him. He got healed. And then he came and said, tell me more about Jesus. And he became one of the loudest Christians in our school. But it began with, I'm not here to talk at you. I need to connect with you. And that needs to become the heart of our culture. It begins under Roman numeral 3 with the key value we talked about in the high road leadership, valuing all people, especially the ones we most don't like. I like what, again, someone said, you have never led an enemy to Christ. You've only led someone who you chose to see as your friend. Even if they treated you as an enemy, if you hate someone's guts, you know, someone says you don't need to be like people, but you need to like people, or you'll never lead people anywhere. So how do you look past all of that? You value all people, just like God did. And I think it's good to examine our hearts sometimes when we're angry with someone and just with people and just say, do I value them? You hear somebody saying something horrible politically, and you just are disgusted. Do you want to ask the question first, do I value them? I hate what they're saying, but do I value them as people? You know, when I preach, I'm trying to think, because here's one of the reasons you get to be ineffective. You just preach to the choir. Talk to people just like you. And I constantly just try to do this little, and I don't do that great all the time. But what would the person who believes the opposite of me think right now when I'm talking? Could I just acknowledge their view, or could I just know that they're there? Could that make me more of a connector versus just preaching to the people who I know are going to say amen to me? And I thought that was great. I love this idea of how Jesus described the Good Samaritan when he said, here's how do you love people. And he gave 3 categories, the thief, the religious leaders, and the Good Samaritan. And I just love to ask people this question. It's the middle road, low road, or high road question. Low road people see people as victims to exploit. Middle road people see them as problems to ignore. High road people see them as people to love. And I thought, isn't that interesting? It's easy for me to start seeing people as problems to avoid. I do not want to get involved with you. Now, I just want to bring this in the church and then out, and this will just be our discussion time, this thing. I just read a book called Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara, and it's the guy who had the #1 restaurant in all the world. He was voted the #1 restaurant in New York City. And he wrote a book called Unreasonable Hospitality. And he said the secret to all their success was unreasonable. What does that mean? Hospitality that if you do it, people would say, that's unreasonable. I mean, they were kind of such fanatics on excellence. They were obsessed with how far from the edge of the table the spoons and forks were put down. You know? Anyhow, I'm not talking about that kind of thing, but their point was this. Go the second mile in creating a hospitality that the way we serve the food is equally as important as the way the cooks make the food. That immediately just brought to mind something that's such a part of Heart for the World. Because I know that, you know, I married Sharon, and her top 3 gifts, one of them is hospitality. And I always thought it was so unreasonable. Because if we were going to have a guest over, I had to clean all day. If even the grandkids are coming, I mean, we ask Eli here, we spend way too much money. Is that right? You know, he says, no, not enough. Anyhow, but it's always like a ridiculous thing. And I said, why? This is so unreasonable. And she would just always say, no, it's what that communicates about how valuable they are. And so when we started the church, of course, I was obsessed with the kitchen, serving the Word of God. I got to preach the Word. In fact, if you were to ask my true opinion, it was, what really just matters is that the Word is preached right, and that the people hear the Word. I'm the cook, right? That's my whole obsession. And her obsession, though, was a beautiful balance. What really matters is, how do you serve the food? How do people who are in the room feel? And I realized when she came up with the culture of the safest, funnest, most God-filled hour of a kid's week. And way back in El Paso, when we started serving and feeding 300 kids every Sunday, it really wasn't just about feeding kids. It was about creating a connection of hospitality. I know the difference because at the same time I tried to start another church without her there, without the hospitality, and it just did not work. I just thought my preaching was all it would ever take. Boy, was I wrong. It really, as someone says, very much, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And people quickly forget everything you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And I think that more than ever in this culture, we're going to have to create pre-evangelism. We're going to have to create hospitality. They're saying now the average person who's lost has to hear and see the gospel 16 to 20 times before they'll make a decision. There's so much hardness right now. And that's why I was so shocked when I go to countries in Africa and others where they're open to the gospel. I mean, I almost fainted just in Mexico when I went knocking on doors, and 9 out of 10 invited me in to tell them the gospel, you know. I said, boy, we are a different place in America, aren't we? You know, as soon as you knock at the door, they either hide or get their gun. But whatever. The point was, there's a lot of resistance right now, and especially to Christians. How many know the word evangelicals is not necessarily a positive word in American culture today? It's synonymous with all kinds of bigotry, whatever it is. What can we do? We can say, well, they're just wrong, or we can say, we've got to work twice as hard to love them to life in Jesus' name. And that has to become far more intentional in our day. John Maxwell would always say, you have to touch a heart before you ask for a hand. I know you want to run, ask for the hand. I know you want to ask for a decision. I know you want to ask for them to agree with you, but you haven't touched their heart yet. And until you touch their heart. And so I just wanted us to think about that both within the church and without outside the church, to create an unforgettable experience. And I know Mike has some great ideas for that. And I love the fact that he's taken the bar up, and many of you could help us. Like now, the guests are they're not only met, but they're texted within 1 hour of the church to be told how thankful we are and how much we want to connect with them. And if they're willing, we have just everything that we can do to create a hospitality in a world of hostility. And then the same thing with Love Las Cruces to Life. We have to go out there. And I just think it's fascinating, Pastor Johnny in El Paso, Hope City, every time a new business opens, they give them a little plaque, congratulations. They take a bunch of people and they say, we are going to blast all over social media, everyone to come to your new restaurant. They're not even trying to witness to the restaurant owner. They just want you to know, we see you, we care, we love you. And they've led lots of people to Jesus just in that simple kind of interchange or exchange. I just feel like today that the more we can think about creating a culture of unreasonable hospitality, the more the pastoring will start happening naturally. You know, most of the people who come to church, I won't even know at this stage. I always think of this guy named James who came to our church, and he was totally away from God. He came in there, it was crowded, he couldn't really find a seat, he just got up and he left. And on the way to his car, I think it was Sue Yeager, chased him down, hunted him down, and met him and asked him and found out what was going on and brought him to a seat and asked some people to move. We have a new guest here. James came to Christ, and we helped him plant a church in Corpus Christi about 20 years ago. But it wasn't because he heard a great sermon. It was because someone noticed him and found him. I just want to shout out Gary Brown here is on Zoom, and Gary's one of the greatest listeners I know. But he told me something I thought was really great. He said, if you want to teach people hospitality, it starts with looking people in the eye. And it starts with asking yourself, how many people did you look in the eye when you walked past this week? Enough to smile. You don't have to even say anything. How many people at church last Sunday did you make eye contact with? I mean, that's so little, but I thought that was genius because it's always the little things that create the momentum for the bigger things to happen. The other thing is we are going to have to encourage twice as much today. You know, I've just been asking the Lord, because you're reading about these teen suicides, you're reading about depression, and there's a whole lot you could say to it, but one thing we can say to it, people need to be encouraged more than they've ever needed. I love this quote of Craig Russell says, if you ever think of something positive about a person or noticing them doing something good, don't you dare just think about it. Do whatever you can to tell them what you did was awesome. And encourage them as much as you can and then double it. That's how you create a culture of hospitality. Encourage them as much as you can think and then double how much you just encourage them. I thought that was really great. This Will Guidero said, he says, what we're trying to give people is not luxury, but something priceless. He said, luxury costs a lot of money. Priceless is creating a memory they will never forget. I just love that. I'll never forget a lady that I was with on a mission trip in Zambia, and there were all these little girls in this village, and we didn't have a whole lot. We were going to pray for this village chief, and somehow she pulled out of her purse, she had a bunch of barrettes and little bobby pins and some combs, and she shouted out to all these girls, we are going to have beauty shop. And went and found a bucket of water out of a crazy well. And for the next hour, they just braided probably 60, 70 little girls' hair and sang to them. The moment they did that, the whole environment changed in the village. what was amazing is the chief came to Jesus and his wife was healed just because of creating an environment through a beauty shop. So anyhow, just to summarize this in a way, and I'd love just for at your table discuss in a minute. If we are going to reach Las Cruces, the world, it doesn't start with the sheep, it starts with the shepherds. It starts with, are we going to be more caring? And I don't think it's any accident that Jesus used the words, he had compassion on them. When he saw the multitudes, he had compassion. The word is literally a word that means splankna. It means pain in the gut. It broke his heart. He felt, I can't stand this. I hurt. His prayer was, they've got to have a shepherd. So this is not just people in pulpits, but how do we all be shepherds? And how do we teach our whole youth group to be shepherds? What would mean in a culture of a small group or a Bible school class or anyone to have the designated hospitality chief? Your job is to make sure everybody experienced the ultimate hospitality. Because if we do that one thing, we will change everything. We have to connect before we correct. How is our tone? How is our conversation? How again, it's 90% how we say it, 10% what we said. Does your tone warm people or hurt people? How do we see the people out there, and do we see them valued? Do we know how to listen before we speak? Do we know how to close the gap with people far from God by our love, by our connection? What is the predetermined identity, belief, and commitment we will make? Let me just give you a few you could determine, and that's the goal every time. I am a shepherd. Everywhere I go, I see my job is to add value. I'm a shepherd to anyone who I have a chance to love and care about, whether at Walmart or at Heart for the World Church or in line at the airport. My calling is to be an encourager. So if I notice anything positive, I will look those people in the eye and I will say whatever encouragement thing I can say, and then I'll double how much I say to encourage them better. I'm a person who looks in the world and looks past their faults and says, what could I do to bridge the gap between where they are and where I am? I will be someone who lives in honor towards all men. That's what Paul said, honor all men. Even honor Caesar, who's going to kill you someday. I will honor all people, and I will do anything short of sinning to make a bridge so that I could share Jesus Christ. Those are just a few. We could go on. Maybe you can come up with your own. I also just want to make a declaration today. Heart for the World will be the most hospitable space in the city of Las Cruces. No one will be allowed to get on this property without being loved on 20, 30 times. It will seem ridiculous. People will act uncomfortable, but they'll love it. Every Heart for the World member will walk with their eyes open and look people in the eyes thinking, how could I express their value and worth? We will pray an atmosphere of love and joy and warmth to everyone we meet. And we will intentionally go out into the community everywhere we can to take the hospitality of Jesus to the worst, most painful, darkest places of our city so that people feel Jesus before they even hear Jesus. Those are a few of my declarations. So maybe we could just have just a few thoughts at your table of just about that, how you've noticed the negative culture. Can I even apply it to people in the church? Can I just say one thing? Oh, I wanted to say this because it's such a big thing about leadership. And that is, the opinions and the feelings are always going to, there's always going to be a conflict in the church, all right? Right? That's what we say all the time. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, someone gets mad. Someone will be mad. And I'm looking around to see who's mad today, but I'm not telling you who it is. Anyhow, the point is, can I just tell you, if you're a parent, you know this. If you're a pastor, you'll learn it. The biggest part of your job is breaking up fights and healing wounds and restoring relationships. If you want to be a pastor, you got to get great at that. And some of you just said, I don't want to be a pastor. But really, if we could just talk a little bit about it at the table, which is, here is what you can't do as a pastor. You can't just choose to peacefully coexist. I don't know what your family culture was. Maybe some of you were violent, and okay, you know that you stopped that because we wouldn't let the security let you in. But maybe your family was like mine, passive aggressive. We just ignore those people. We don't hate them. We just live as though they don't exist now. Can I just tell you, shepherds can never do that. Shepherds not just forgive 47 times 7. They bless 7 times 70. I heard someone say he had to bless one person about 150 times in the spirit before he could feel the river flow again. He says, I will not stop declaring blessing on them till I feel blessing coming out of me. But it was the idea that I cannot allow space in a community because it will become infected, it will become, and even if we don't agree with them, how do we go to them? And number one, we just listen. I have seen 80 to 90% of conflicts resolved if someone just goes and says, I want to hear everything about how that made you feel. And I'm not going to say anything but, wow, I get that, I get that, I get that. And how are we going to do that in pastor? So we do not just have a church that tolerates people, because they will feel it. How many know, just in the minute you've got a conflict in the room, it kills the hospitality of the whole room. And so we just have to constantly work on that. Anyhow, that was just an extra one, that just because I've had to do it 5 times this week. So I wanted you to have some feelings about that. So just take a minute. What stands out to you before you leave, and things that we might just begin to grow in when it comes to changing the culture, becoming and thinking like a shepherd instead of a sheep, and bridging the gap with lost people in our community. So you think you guys could discuss that? Go ahead, just for a few minutes.